and we have selections of different gaming systems. Okay, step one for building the retro Raspberry Pi arcade console, gaming console here. Step number one, of course, we had to get the Raspberry Pi. Follow the instructions on the Raspberry Pi retro gaming site, RetroPie. Replace the SD card with a brand new one, a 32 gig SD card. So I had plenty of room for games. Used a small monitor, a TV with HDMI on it. That's a good thing to start with. And also ordered a game console with USB interface off of Amazon. Plugged that into here and got the Raspberry Pi set up working for the first time. That's step one. An outlet strip here is used. One of the problems that I'd like to mention I had with it, I had a starter kit for the Raspberry Pi that had a 2 amp 5 volt power supply. I was having problems running some of the games, especially when I was trying to run power from them. I was losing power, the game would act up. I had to go order a new power supply. It's hard to see this one. But the new power supply is a 3 amp power supply with 5 volts for the Raspberry Pi to ensure that it had plenty of power for all the things that we were going to do with it. So this is following the instructions on the Raspberry Pi website for retro gaming. RetroPie worked out very well. So just follow their instructions and then get your first part of it working. My next requirement for my game console is that I don't want to have something with little sound and computer speakers. I want something with some punch, so that whenever you have something like a rocket launch or something like that, you can feel it. This was a Class D stereo amplifier that I got off of eBay for $10. It's a Class D, means it's digital, it works on pulse width modulated output. The rear of it has filters to filter out the PWM carrier. The point of this thing is that it's very, very efficient, and it does a great job for frequency range and for retro games. This one here in particular I like because it has 3 outputs. It has left side, right side, and it has a subwoofer driver. So this one's rated 50 watts per channel on the speakers, and the subwoofer's rated for 100. And what's really crazy is that I can't even get that much power out. It's rated at that for peak at 12 to 24 volts out input, but I'm running off of 12 volts on everything. So I can't really drive the max power on it, but it's more than plenty loud already. So some of the things you can, if you wanted to go like a 4-speaker surround sound with woofer, you need 5 outputs. If you just want to use a standard one without the subwoofer, you can get a 15-watt stereo amplifier on eBay for $5 or $6. This one was $10, and I was happy to pay $10 because it came with the knobs. It also had the subwoofer output and has a lot more power, so I'm satisfied with that. And having a really big sounding audio system to go with in my RetroPie console, I decided that I wanted to have the speakers enclosures built separately from it rather than integral to the case. What I had found, I'll show you it's kind of odd looking with the grills, is I started off with the subwoofer, which is right here. I ordered a $20 40-watt special subwoofer speaker and built the enclosure out of MDF. I put an angle on the front. I want this is the subwoofer speaker I want aimed at the chest of the player, and so I didn't want it aimed straight out. I want to have some options to it, so I can either have it push down if it gets too loud or too obnoxious, or I can flip it over. Flip it over in the game console when I put it together, so that I can have the bass either up facing your chest or turn it down if it's too loud. A nice grill on here. Show that is the subwoofer. The grill also was purchased on Amazon, as well as the subwoofer cone. That was a special order. It's a 6-ohm 40-watt subwoofer. And this is the speaker enclosure. Is a ported enclosure designed from calculations I found on the web. It was tuned at for about 40 hertz. This is the ports in the rear. The other 2 speakers are just standard car speakers. I found those in my workshop, and I took the same enclosure that had actually the first subwoofer enclosure I built was this one, and I wanted to change the format so that it fit into the bottom of the RetroPie console. So I went to a tubular type of flat design, and then reused the box and put car speakers in them. These are 6-inch 30-watt car speakers. This one was the original base one. I didn't like the blockiness of it. I wanted to use this design. And then the other one was actually a third different design. What's interesting is all these different boxes actually have the same volume, and the ports are about the same. So they actually put out a whole lot of bass. So that is the sound system, and the idea is to build the RetroPie console also around it, so the sound system can be removed and taken out. On it here, I have on the output, I have connectors so that they can be disconnected and transported. The next consideration as I was building the console was to move up from the small screen size I had used before for setting it up the first time. This is a 5x7 HDMI screen, but for building the console, it was great for demos, but it's not great for the console. So I had several monitors laying around, donated from different places, or you can get them cheap at Goodwill or other places like that. These monitors are older. These ones they do not have HDMI inputs, but the price was right, and all I had to do is order an adapter, VGA to HDMI, and that did the job for converting the screens. Now, looking at all the screen variations I had, there's sizes, big sizes, little sizes. I chose this one. This was a monitor I had sitting in an old piece of equipment off of a old computer running Windows ME. This monitor is 12 by 18. The rest of the monitors that I had laying around were much bigger, 12 by 20, 21, 22. The fallacy with it is the bigger the monitor, the better the resolution, and the better the graphics, but these retro game graphics are not very good. So I chose to have a big enough monitor, this is 12 by 18, that you could see things, but if it gets much bigger than that, the images are hard to see. They look very blocky. For building the enclosures, not only for the Raspberry Pi Retro Arcade, but also for the speakers, I'm using a 6-foot long by 1 foot MDF medium density fiber board. This fiber board is 5/8 inch thick, and it says it's a 6-foot length, so it's very easy to transport. It's also extremely inexpensive. It's meant for shelves, for doing cheap shelves. It's for a 6-foot piece is $5. So this is really easy to work with. The nice thing is too, using Elmer's wood glue, everything really goes together real nice. It dries up and it's fairly solid, and it's sandable and easy to work with. So because I don't want to build a full-size one, this is going to be a desktop, this size fiberboard makes it really economical, affordable, and if you make mistakes, it's not going to kill your budget. The idea of the final console design will be to enclose this screen, a 12 by 18 inch screen, and have it rest on top of the subwoofer. These actually the pedestal will be removed and the parts will go around the enclosure and contain that, so it looks like a Retro Pi console. And then the speakers and the electronic parts will go beside the subwoofer. So to get a preliminary idea of the fit and what it's going to look like at the end, I've taken 2 side pieces that I've cut out of the bookshelf type of skinny bookshelf, wide 11 inch, 12 inch MDF. I cut a circle out. Actually, where the face of the monitor is, I had cut the 12 inch area out, but rather than make it a square cutout, I put rounded corners on it like a real arcade game. Just used a bucket of a big bucket to do the edge corners so it's smooth. The monitor will rest on these pieces. There'll be some cross pieces in here on these brackets here. These were glued into place right there as holders to put cross pieces in to hold it together. The monitor will slide in from the top once it's all together. But this is what it'll look like. The electronics for the speakers and the Raspberry Pi will go beside the subwoofers. Okay, just to show again that the sides for the console were just cut out of this MDF bookshelf board. It's 12 inches wide by measure, but actually it's 11 1/4. Measured up to give room for the subwoofer, and then the brackets, and then the monitor size. Cut a corner off, left the front like this, and then cut the hole out. And this will be the first pass prototype. And for the cross brackets, just glued some bare pieces that were actually the whole, and then cut it in slices and used that and glued it on there for cross-piece brackets. It doesn't have to hold that much weight. After it gets glued into place, and I'll put screws in just to make sure that it stays solid. After I had the first piece cut, then I laid the other piece on top of it and made a mirror image of it. And so there's two of them. This one here, you can see, has all the markings on it from the measurements, where the screen is going to slide in to the bottom of it. So I also want to make a note, while this is not put together yet, I've made some markings here and here. These are for putting screws in for mounting the outlet strips. I'm not sure where the outlet strips are going to go just yet. They may go on a cross piece, they may go inside on the sides, but I wanted to make sure to have the markings there so I can pre-drill and put little screws in there just in case, so I can move it around. Just as a construction tip, the hole that was traced out by blocking off the area of the screen of the TV monitor screen for the HDMI, it's going to be at least 4 inches back, and it was 12 inches across, so I drew a square and then put a big trash can on top of it to get rounded corners and drew the edges of that, and the scroll saw was used to cut it. And what I found, this scroll saw is really great for cutting pieces of MDF. It does a really good job. One of the things you must constantly do when you're building this stuff is constantly dry fit things, see how they're going to work, see if it makes sense. This is the cross pieces, dry fit in with the sides, laying up against something hard and a fairly flat surface, just to get an idea how the fit is. This piece here is going to be cut in half. It's not carrying any weight, just to make sure that this whole thing is solid. This gap is where the computer monitor is going to sit. It needs to be at least 2 or 3 inches deep. The monitor itself is like 2 1/4. So this gap here is going to sit in here. So that's got to be at least 2 1/2 inches sit in that gap. So we got room to play with here. The other thing was that these boards are cut on a scroll saw, so their edges aren't perfectly straight like you would have if you used a power tool that had a straight edge on it. So going through the pieces, I had to find a piece that had a nice flat edge to it. The rest of them are kind of wavy, but they're inside and it's not really that important. Okay, they won't be seen. So take your pieces, dry fit them. You don't need to have all the fancy equipment for gluing things together if you're doing one of these smaller monitors. Sitting on the floor and finding something hard to put it against will do the job. And check the couch for being square in the front and a footstool for being square. They're okay, so I can wedge in between them and do a first pass dry fit with the subwoofer and the TV monitor. Checking for details, things like the power cords and the connections for the monitor seem to be okay. It'll be fixed there so it stays up. The brackets aren't in. The other thing is, there is the subwoofer here is kind of tight against the bottom, so I have to make some adjustments there. But otherwise, it looks like it's a good start. The first pass is all squared up. Toothpicks and popsicle sticks can be used as shims whenever things are not quite equal or lined up. Just put the first braces in with the glue, and we're going to let it dry. Everything's nice and square while it was sitting there. Made sure everything was square and lined up. For holding the monitor into place, I slid it into the spot and added foam stops that I cut from a piece of foam rubber and glued those onto the side. That way there's some movement at the top, and the monitor can be removed easy, and it is protected from impacts and things like that, and I can shift it around. After the rest of the frame was assembled and dried, gave it a test fit, then the last board here is the marquee board for the marquee for other things. So right now that's clamped and glued together, and that should be the last piece for the time being.